Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. Today's Civ overview is all about the Goths. Naturally, their leather jackets make them nearly impervious to arrows, but there's lots of other aspects of the civilization worth looking at as well. They fluctuated around being the most popular civilization result in my Best Civ for You quiz that I put up last week, with about 1/7 of the results recommending them at this point. It was an unexpected result for lots of people who asked for good cavalry and siege and thought Goths were basically just an infantry civilization, but you may be pleasantly surprised with the tech tree once we look at it in a bit more depth, and I'll also try to explain why they seem like such a good fit for so many players. Let's check them out. Their team bonus is that barracks work 20% faster, and in the late game, if you're spamming halberdiers and champions, that's like having 6 barracks when you really have 5. To attach some hard numbers, in Feudal Age, a non-Goth or Aztec player can normally make 10 men-at-arms in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, but a Goth ally can make those same 10 men-at-arms in 2 minutes and 56 seconds, which is pretty cool. And after adding conscription in Imperial Age, increasing your military building work rate by 33%, you can make 10 champions in 2 minutes and 12 seconds instead of 2 minutes and 38. That can obviously add up, and unlike some other team bonuses, looking at you Saracens, you can almost be guaranteed to get at least some use out of faster barracks with a Goth ally. Looking at their Civ bonuses now, the first one is that they get cheaper infantry. Now back in the Age of Kings days, it used to be that infantry were 10% cheaper in Feudal, 15% in Castle, and 25% in Imperial Age, but these days it's just minus 25% starting immediately in Feudal. And in reality, it's actually 35% cheaper. We can see the cost here in the HD version is 65% of its normal cost, or 35% cheaper if you prefer to think of it that way. It's the same thing, although I prefer the first wording. If hearing percentages like 35% doesn't do it for you, we can think of Goths as having a special sale on infantry. They buy 2 and then get the next one free. It's actually a slightly better deal than that, since that's 33% instead of 35%, but it's a good approximation. That means your army of 30 pikes or champions costs the same as someone else's 20, which is why in general you don't go head to head with infantry if you're against Goths, unless maybe if you're rocking a civilization with their own great infantry bonus yourself. Also keep in mind it's not quite as great as it sounds for Goths, because other civilizations may have some eco bonuses that make it easier for them to afford better units than yours at any particular period, and they're unlikely to counter your infantry with infantry of their own, so they may still find a cost-effective way to deal with your units, but you can't deny it's a bonus with some huge potential. You may have thought of Byzantines as the kings of cheap halberdiers, but that title actually goes to the Goths, who, after some favorable rounding, end up spending 13% less on their halberdiers than Byzantines do. So even against Byzantines, the Goths can field 7 halberdiers to the Byzantines' 6. The second Civ bonus is that infantry have +1 attack versus buildings. Now, an interesting question might be, is this an early or a late game bonus? On the one hand, we might think it's an early game bonus because of the technology race that happens between unit attack and building HP, where unit attack goes up throughout the game as building HP tends to go up as well. So the relative impact of 1 more damage is most significant in the early game. A Goth man-at-arms does 17% more damage to an archery range and palisade wall, and twice as much damage to a stone wall, though that's because it's 2 damage instead of 1. It's kind of one of those half-full, half-empty things. On the other hand, in the late game you're more likely to have lots of units, and a flood of champions surrounding a building are going to potentially make use of this bonus more, just from the sheer number of attacks that are happening. In this case, each champion does only 8% more damage to the town center because of the bonus, which is objectively less than the man-at-arms increase, but because of the overwhelming number of them, it means a group against its town center ungarrison the villagers in 19 seconds instead of 21. That might be significant if you're raiding, but overall it looks like a relatively modest bonus that works subtly in the background. The third Civ bonus is that villagers have +5 attack versus wild boar, and their hunters carry 50 and more meat. Now, this is a bit of a strange one. +5 attack is actually huge, but a Spanish villager with supremacy is still better against boars. A Goth villager with Loom can almost take out a boar on his own. Now, considering the fact that you'd rarely fight a boar without a group of villagers nearby though, that fact alone isn't very useful. I suppose it could help kill boar faster under your town center, but it's not a significant bonus in that respect, and I found it increases the likelihood that I kill the boar too early. Now, all that being said, this bonus does allow the Goths to open up a new possible strategy. Normally, if you want to send villagers out to get meat from a boar, you need 9 of them to kill the boar and bring back all the meat if you factor in the decay rate and their 35 meat carry limit. Now, Goth hunters can carry 50 meat because they're plus 15 carrying, and that means that you can bring all the meat back from the boar with only 6 villagers instead of 9. Now, normally sending 6 villagers to go hunt a boar without Loom would be risky, and there's a chance that you could lose one, but that's where the attack bonus comes in for Goths. They do 8 damage to the boar instead of 3, so they can kill the boar before any villagers are in danger, and it makes going out and hunting with 6 villagers viable. This wouldn't be something that you would take advantage of in the Dark Age, since you want a steady food supply to keep your villagers coming out, but it could be something that after you click up to Feudal you might do on a Black Forest or a Yucatan map. The carry bonus also applies to deer as well. Like all civilizations, Goths can use 4 villagers on a deer to take back 121 food in one trip. But if other civilizations use 3 villagers on a deer, they get back before the deer is done and drop off 105 food, where the 3 Goth villagers stay and bring back 116 food, so it's a bit better. As well, normally when a regular civilization sends 2 villagers to get a deer, they bring back 70 food and have about 50 left on the deer that they have to go back to. Now that means either 2 trips, wasting time, or you're only getting half the food from the deer. 2 Goth villagers, on the other hand, can take 100 of the 140 food in one trip, and only leave a little bit of food on the deer to decay. You'll always get the most food from boar or deer by using lots of villagers, and the Goth bonus doesn't help there. But in non-optimal hunting, the Age of Empires taboo of using fewer than 4 hunters on a deer doesn't impact the Goths as much because of their bonus. Their last civ bonus is that they have plus 10 population in the Imperial Age. It makes sense that they get a higher population, since as Goths you have the potential to make a lot of units at a reduced cost, but in the late game any civilization will be able to reach the population limit. The Goths' cheaper units let them turn over units for longer in that situation, but they don't really get to use their strength of overwhelming the opponent with numbers. Combining a higher population limit and cheaper units though means that they can get away with potentially fewer trade carts and farmers in the late game while sustaining military production. And this bonus makes sure that you have the most military on the field with all factors being equal. They're clearly meant to be a civilization that overwhelms with numbers, and I don't want to oversell the impact of 10 population since it's not that much. But just remember this if you're ever picking a civilization for one of those 25 population limit games. So that's the Goth civ bonuses, and now we're going to look at their unique unit, the Huskarl. I'm going to look a bit more in depth on this one than I normally do in the overviews, because the Huskarl is a very unique unit, with the elite version's 10 pierce armor being the highest of any non-ram unit available. It's even better than a trebuchet's pierce armor after your blacksmith techs are done. The pierce armor is really its selling point, as it otherwise seems to be overpriced at a cost of 52 food and 26 gold, with similar health to a champion, lower melee armor, and lower attack. Statistically, we might say you're better off going with the champion over the Huskarl unless there's a lot of archers or you're doing some raiding and the pierce armor is a big consideration. The Huskarl isn't just good against archers because of its pierce armor though, it also does 6 bonus damage versus archers before the elite upgrade and 10 extra damage afterwards. It's actually kind of obscene how many archers a Huskarl can take down. A post-imperial elite Mangadai, longbowman, plumed archer, and a keep all do either 1 or 2 damage against elite Huskarls, whereas the elite Huskarl definitely doesn't hold back in its attacks against those units. This is some of the most brutal countering you can find in Age of Empires, though a very large group of archers can possibly survive against Huskarls if they're in small enough numbers. But even a reasonably steady stream, which you can definitely expect from a Goth player, will absolutely overwhelm unprotected archers, as many archers in groups of 40 still have to focus fire on elite Huskarl twice to kill it. Champions do theoretically make a decent counter to Huskarls, or a nice buffer for your own archers, but in reality people just micro around those counter units, or a Goth player can outproduce and whittle down your buffer units to get at those tasty archers. What about the Chuko Nu though? It's pretty unique too, and it has lots of arrows, which means it seems to do okay where other archers don't, so maybe it's not so bad. Well, it's still not great. They only do about 5 damage per shot, depending on how many of their shots land. So overall, even when they're masked, they're not a great counter to even a fairly small group of Huskarls. Huskarls versus Paladins is an interesting one that's worth knowing about if you plan to play the Goths. And since Huskarls have no base melee armor, we expect that they should be weak to a strong melee unit like the Paladin. And they do get crushed one-on-one because of the Paladin's superior health, attack, and armor. But Huskarls are so cheap, they don't have to be very good to be cost effective. To illustrate the idea, here are 2 armies costing 1,000 gold. Who do you think's gonna win? Then again, the Goth Halberdier is the cheapest in the game, so you'd probably be using that instead. In fact, even the super cheap Goth champions will be painfully cost effective against the Paladin. In the interest of full disclosure, and so I don't get accused of suppressing information, yes, they even beat my beloved Japanese halberdiers with equal resources on both sides. They also get a slight bonus against Eagle Warriors, and considering the high gold costs of Eagle Warriors, that's generally a favorable exchange for the Huskarl, though in that situation, you'd want to go with champions instead. Elite Huskarls might be the best raiding unit in the game, not only because of their bonus damage against buildings, but also because castles and town center fire won't deter them. You basically force your opponent to respond by creating or bringing back melee units to deal with it. A couple of warnings about using the Huskarl though. First, be careful not to take unnecessary shots from hand cannoneers. Even though they do pierce damage, which the Huskarl pierce armor protects them from, they also have a plus 10 bonus against infantry, so they end up doing their regular 17 damage against you. That's some solid range damage, but that being said, if you can get the Huskarl through the buffer units and reach the hand cannoneers in melee combat, it's good game for them, because Huskarls also have their own plus 10 damage against archer units, which counts towards hand cannoneers. This is one of those weird times that 2 units match up that have a huge bonus against each other, and the deciding factor is usually how well the hand cannoneer player can keep them out of melee combat. Now, this isn't the only time the Huskarl becomes, paradoxically, a good counter to an anti-infantry unit. Mass Scorpions are normally a good choice against infantry, but they also do pierce damage, so they end up only doing 7 or so damage per shot against the Huskarls, and even less than that to the units in behind. It makes them confusing to counter, because Huskarls are the exception to most of the infantry rules that you think you know. So now how do you stop Huskarls if Paladins don't work, Archers don't work, Siege apparently doesn't work, and they can outproduce your infantry at a lower cost? Well, it's certainly possible, and there's a few unique units that they're weak to, especially the Jaguar Warrior, the Teutonic Knight, Byzantine Cataphract, and the Japanese Samurai, as well as there's a number of ranged melee units that are also effective, like Mamelukes and Throwing Axemen. The Catapult line and Champions also have potential because of their high melee damage, but unless you happen to be one of the civilizations with either a good unique unit or siege onagers, what can you do to counter the Huskarls once you see them? Well, how about this idea? You don't let them get to the point that they can hit Imperial with a strong economy and flood you with elite Huskarls. The whole game with the Goth player is counting down to this Gothic flood, and they don't get stonewalls for this reason. It's your window of opportunity to put pressure on them, because once you see this, it's not time to ask, what can I build to stop this from going bad? It's already gone bad. The plan at this point is to hope you have a good unique unit to counter them and hope they run out of gold. One last note about the Huskarls is the ones that you create at the barracks are statistically identical to the ones you make at the castle, but you can't select both castle and barracks ones on your screen by double-clicking one, and it seems they're actually viewed by the game as 2 distinct but indistinguishable units. You have to double-click a unit, say one made at the castle, and then hold Control and double-click an unselected one, presumably from the barracks, and that'll get all of them. Alright, so that's the Huskarl in a nutshell. Now let's take a look at their unique techs. The first one lets you build Huskarls at a barracks. Wait a second, you can't make unique units at a barracks in Age of Empires? This is anarchy. Ah, that explains it then. Now, 2 things. First of all, this costs 450 food and 250 gold, which is about the cost of 9 Huskarls. That's a pretty hefty investment right when you hit Castle Age. You also have to get a castle up, research the technology, and then still have enough resources left over to flood the map with units. If you're in a position to do that, that's great, but I don't think that's going to happen most of the time, and it usually doesn't for me. So this Goth Huskarl flood that I keep talking about probably isn't going to happen at the start of Castle Age, and more likely you'll still be doing regular stuff, like knights if it's an open map, or just booming on a closed map. You're not going to be a powerhouse yet, so don't get ahead of yourself in Castle Age. Second of all, bear in mind that it takes 16 seconds to create a Huskarl from your castle, and 13 seconds from a barracks, because of your 20% faster working barracks civ bonus. So it's not like your castle makes them at a snail pace anyway, and your barracks can still make other units beside the Huskarl. Getting the unique tech in Castle Age does open the possibility for getting lots of non-elite Huskarls from your barracks in the mid to late Castle Age, but don't feel like you have to go for it and mad rush the map with Huskarls unless you want to. At this point, you'll probably be biding your time. Things are about to get crazy though. Their second unique technology, the Imperial Age tech, makes your barracks work 100% faster. You know how I said it was 13 seconds to make a Huskarl from the barracks in Castle Age because of their barracks bonus? Yeah, so now it's about 7 seconds, and that turns into about 5.5 seconds after conscription. That's 11 elite Huskarls per minute from each barracks, and as a comparison, a Hun stable with their stable bonus makes one paladin every 19 seconds, or about 3 per minute. That isn't just for Huskarls though, and champions and halberdiers also get sped up. So a Goth player can end up creating both of those units in a fraction of the time it would take another civilization, meaning you basically have 2.5 barracks for each of their 1. Okay, now you can unleash your units. You may hit Imperial Age with the same population as everyone else, but after your initial period of getting all those unique techs, your population is going to literally explode. Okay, not literally. But that's why you have to pressure a Goth player early, because if they've been able to sit around and build a giant economy at this point, there's nothing stopping them from turning that big income and economy straight into units. And that's not just Huskarls, but that's champions and halberdiers as well. That being said, the beauty of Age of Empires is you can also completely ignore that strategy and go for cavalry archers exclusively, and it's entirely possible to win the game like that too. But this is just how I personally see Goths played a lot in team games, and when they seem to be the strongest. As always, don't get married to just one strategy though, and that goes for every civilization. Except maybe the Spanish, where you kinda have to do a supremacy villager rush at some point. So taking a look at the Forgotten Empire's changes, it says infantry are minus 35% starting in Feudal, but it ends up being the same when you test it, so it looks like they just corrected the original mislabeling. They also had Treadmill Crane removed. Now that's a little unusual for Forgotten Empires, but I suspect this was to lessen the ability of Goths to drop barracks behind enemy lines as quickly. That being said, it's still entirely possible, and one hidden barracks in Imperial Age behind your opponents produces Huskarls about as quickly as 4 stables produce Hussars. So you can get an idea of the raiding potential there, that even one barracks left unnoticed for a couple of minutes can do. It's even to the point that a few villagers caught out of position can create barracks around themselves, which can produce a small army faster than your enemy can take those barracks down. So that's all of their bonuses. Of course, if you already played the Goths a fair bit, then you've experienced all of this firsthand. Now I'm going to take a look at the tech tree, and I think we'll start to see why so many people got matched with them, even if you were looking for a siege or cavalry civilization. As always, when we look at the tech trees, I'm going to start with archers. Elite skirmishers are there with all of the upgrades except for thumb ring, and hand cannoneers are there as well. You probably shouldn't go down the cavalry archer route in the late game without thumb ring and Parthian tactics, and they don't have any bonuses towards a cavalry archer rush. So there's no reason you can't do that, but it would be a bit unusual. Not having Arbalest is a slight drawback, but going from archers into crossbows at the start of Castle Age would be a possible game plan, especially if you want to play the Goths more aggressively. Again, not having any strong eco or archer bonuses in Feudal Age means that your archer rush would lag behind some other civilizations a bit. I feel like their archers are respectable and could be used as counters and for mediocre early pressure, but it would struggle as the backbone of any strategy. For that reason, I'd give them a B- for archers. Looking at the infantry now, they could be seen as having the best infantry in the game, and they certainly are in tests with equal resources because of that cheaper infantry bonus, though they do get dominated by Aztec and Japanese champions and halberdiers one-on-one, or in groups with equal numbers, because of the Goths missing armor upgrade and the other civilizations having bonuses. The Goth infantry units themselves aren't particularly strong. You just win a lot of engagements with them because you can create a lot of them for a long time. Even the Viking pikes end up being similar one-on-one to Goth halberdiers, with the Goth halberdier left at 6 HP. And again, one-on-one versus paladins, the Viking pikeman does 75 damage against it before it dies, and the Goth halberdier only does 74. That's a combination of the lower armor for Goths and the HP bonus for the Vikings completely balancing a plus 16 anti-cavalry bonus that the Halberdier gets. It's pretty crazy. In a situation with equal resources on both sides though, Goths win, of course. In other situations where you could have equal resources on both sides, Goth champions and Halberdiers outperform even the Japanese, and their extra population limit and faster unit turnover could mean that they do really have a numbers advantage, especially in the early Imperial phase of the game. Between the fastest barracks and cheapest infantry in the game, I want to give them an A+, but they just don't get that armor upgrade, and they don't really dazzle one-on-one. If only there was something to put them over the top, some kind of infantry wildcard. Oh yeah, their unique unit is also an infantry that counters anti-infantry units, and can basically nullify archer civilizations. Okay, I suppose that'll do. It's an A+ for infantry. Moving on now to their stable. First of all, you might not expect this, but Goths get Hussars. That means they have elite skirmishers with all the blacksmith techs, the most cost-effective halberdiers, and now Hussars as well, although they're missing the last cavalry armor tech. They get bloodlines, which a lot of people like, they don't get paladin, which a lot of people are okay sacrificing, and they don't get camels, which lots of people also said that they could do without. I hope you're starting to see there's more to the Goth late game than just their infantry spam. Their stable, for example, has lots of units that people like to use, and they aren't missing anything crucial for the average player, except maybe the paladin, depending on your playstyle. It's a great stable for the Castle Age, and a night rush with bloodlines is entirely possible, with some cavalry options in the late game too. It's not a great stable tech tree, but it's a B at least. Moving on to Siege now. Personally, I'm never stoked on missing Siege Engineers, and there's no eco bonus for wood, gold, or Siege effectiveness, so you're not likely to see mass Siege out of the Goths. That being said, they have a surprising flexibility with Siege, including the Bombard Cannon. That means again, they get both gunpowder units, which is always nice. It's not top tier by any means, but I'd say it's at least average, and again, probably unexpectedly good. It's a B again, I would say. It's pretty good, but not great. Next, let's look at the Navy. Well, I'm starting to feel like a broken record here. Good tech tree, missing just a couple of things that nobody really uses all that often, and unfortunately no eco bonus. This is the 4th time I've said that so far in this tech tree. Like with archers and cavalry, there's no eco bonus, so the rush isn't going to be great, as that hunting bonus doesn't really give you a big leg up on getting onto water. It's really a low C or C- for rushing. But then in the late game, it's a solid B or B+, because they get all of the important techs. Shipwright and Bracer are pretty critical for long Imperial water fights, and Goths shouldn't have trouble beating civilizations without those techs. Drydock makes ships faster and carry more units on a transport ship, which isn't critical for controlling water in the late game. Now they're not at the same level as Vikings or Saracens, but they're a B in the Imperial Age at least, and overall I'd say that makes them a C+. Moving on to monks now. Okay, this one isn't great, but hey, most people don't care about the monastery anyway. No redemption kinda hurts, and it's sort of unredeemable to be missing that. It means you can't convert siege and buildings, so that pretty much removes 40% of the literally 5 things a monk can do. Another thing is convert units, but they don't have the +3 range tech, so they won't be great at that either. At least they can grab relics and heal your units, right? It's looking like a C for me on this one. Looking at defenses now. Now look, it probably feels like I'm giving a ton of low grades here. Just remember, the civilization is more than the sum of its grades. But yeah, it's an F. Look, offense is the best defense, sure, but I gotta tell ya, a bit of defense never hurts, right? The Goths are like a football team with 20 forwards and no goalie. Sometimes you need a goalie, and there's no shame in that. Luckily, the Goths can basically make walls of units, so that almost counts, right? In the interest of fairness to the rest of the civilizations and how I've presented and graded their defenses so far though, Goths really set the bottom of the scale with no stone walls or tower upgrades. That being said, a nice little nod here to the famous Gothic architecture, which is a nice touch. And finally, we'll finish up with the economy. First of all, a little bonus here, getting the last wood and food techs, but missing out on the last gold tech. It's looking pretty middle of the road overall, but I've set a precedent for including cost reduction bonuses as an eco-tech. And considering how huge the discount is, it's fair to say you'll not just have more units than the opponent, but quite possibly outlast your opponent at production, even in situations where the unit matchup isn't in your favor. Now that sounds like a good economy to me. Don't forget that that little population boost in Imperial Age means you could even have a few more trade carts or whatever. I'd actually give the Goths a C+ for early economy, and that turns into at least an A in the endgame. It's hard to visualize if they have a good economy or not because they're saving most of their resources in the end, when people are usually starting to stockpile food anyway. But overall, I'd give it a B+ across the board, considering now that eco bonus hits right at the start of Feudal Age. So that's my take on the Goths. Whatever happens, they're a fun civilization to play and certainly do their own thing. My hope is that the biggest takeaway from this is that they can do a lot more than just infantry, and can end up with a surprisingly well-balanced army of cavalry and siege as well. One of the easier ways to get around their weaknesses is to play them on maps that begin with stone walls, like Arena, or on maps that start in the Imperial Age, like Deathmatch. Team Black Forest is also pretty viable as well, given how often people pick archer civilizations on that map. I've even found they're respectable on 1 vs 1 Arabia, though they're certainly not a go-to civilization on that map. That's all for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.